I'm trying to think of what would have been there, or if there was just big gaps. But they definitely, these blanks are matte finish, and at the point when we made this, we still were doing the glossy finish on the black. The first module, the Mod D mod, was matte black. The dealers, Sean Cleary and Andrea Schneider, mostly Sean actually, said no black panels. Got to do silver if you want us to buy them. So then redid it in silver and kind of forgot about it until it came time to do the touch modules, which have to have. And even then, I remember Sean saying something along the lines of, do they have to be black? Can you make the Renee and the pressure points silver? And I explained to him there's no way. You had to use the PCB type panel in order to make the circuit that you touch to activate them. But I went with the glossy. It was actually a mistake. I ordered matte, but they sent glossy, and it was right before the NAMM show where we were going to show them. And so I just went with it, and then from then on, it was like, okay, they're glossy. We showed it at NAMM with the glossy, and then because Renee was supposed to sort of match it, I think the idea was, I guess we'll make Renee glossy. No, I don't think so. Not with obviously not the Mod D mod, and not with the Woggle Bug or the Maths or the QMMG, which is not in here. I think the idea at that point was there's the Dopefer system. The Dopefer system has 99% of what you need to do modular synthesis, and it's done well. And Dopefer's a great company. And then the idea was, well, what does Dopefer not make? And so, for example, you see that with like the early Harvestman modules as well. Scott did the Malgorithm, that was his first module, and that module is something that really caught my eye. It was very different than the Dopefer modules, and it did something that no Dopefer modules did. And so I think initially the idea was to look at what was already there in the Dopefer system and try to come up with some ideas for something that Dieter hadn't already done, which when you look at the system, I think even at that point, there was at least 60 modules in it. So coming up with new ideas seemed hard at the time, although fast forwarding to today, where there's over 300 manufacturers of synthesizer modules for Eurorack who have all done incredible things, or most of them have done incredible things. Now it's even harder to come up with fresh ideas. Well, I think some years passed and we did some other things. A few things happened actually. Plan B happened, and initially it was the Model 15, which was very different than any of the oscillators that Dopefer was offering. And so I think that was something that kind of sparked us a bit. And when I say us, I mean some of the earlier manufacturers. I've mentioned Harvestman, who now goes by Industrial Music Electronics, but there was also Tip Top Audio. Livewire, of course, did the AFG, which also sparked our imaginations. Again, very different from anything that Dopefer had done at that point. Some other early manufacturers like IntelliGel. And I think we were all starting to see that maybe there were a lot more things that could be done with modular outside of the Dopefer system. I was sitting outside of Zebulon, the Zebulon Cafe in Brooklyn, which is no longer there. That tells you how long ago this was. Probably 2010 or 2011 with Surachai. And we were talking about this idea of the modular synth as an instrument and the music that you can make with a modular synth. I think at that point, a lot of people just did not know about modular synthesis. And then within the group of musicians that did know about modular synthesis, a large portion of them felt that it was largely for creating non-musical sounds. And with the remainder were some folks that were very, very dedicated to the art of patching a modular synthesizer. And so we came up with this idea to challenge a select group of artists to create unique pieces of music where the only variable was them, the person, the artist. So they would all use the exact same system, this system sitting right here in front of me. And each one of them would get an allotted period of time to record live to stereo 2-track a piece of music or two with the modular synthesizer. And the idea was that we would showcase how modular wasn't just this one thing that people thought it was. Modular was what the artist put into it and how the artist guided it. And so the hope was that we would get 5 very unique records, 5 records that were very unique from each other. And so we selected these 5 artists. They were Richard Devine, Alessandro Cortini, Robert A. Lowe, Surachai, and Keith Fullerton Whitman. And the reason these artists were selected, one was because we liked them, we enjoyed their music, and also we knew them, so we could contact them and talk to them. And we knew that they were all very devoted to the art of patching, advanced modular synthesis. So it was truly a challenge. And what's interesting is the shared system, as people see it today, is this flagship product. It's this flagship make noise instrument. But as it was conceived, it was not conceived of as a product at all. It was actually conceived of as a challenge to these 5 artists. It was a challenge to them to create unique pieces of music using only this system. Now, of course, immediately the artist started asking, well, could I also use this? Could I also use that? And we had to make some concessions. So several of the artists asked if they could use reverb. Because the original shared system, as it sits here, as you can see, did not have an herb verb. The herb verb had not been created yet. So that was the first concession that we made. We said, yeah, okay, you can use reverb. They were supposed to have no overdubs, although I've been informed that Richard might have done some, or potentially many, overdubs.
No multi-tracking, no overdubbing of any sort.
Rich, you didn't do multi-tracking, did you?
Multi-tracking. I did some serious layering.
The other concession we made was, as you can see, there's no malts. And at the time, Tip Top had just started producing their stack cables. And so we said, well, you can use stack cables. Since we did not fit a malt in here, you can use stack cables. And so that was one of the other concessions.
Where you could take one cable and plug it in, and then take another cable and plug it into the top of it, and then you're able to use it like that. So I was able to use these, and I did use one of those cables. So that was where I got a little wily.
But that was the idea. The idea was to challenge these artists. Not really. At the time, this was nearly everything we made. And in fact, I think we might have been, we were waiting to finish the oscillator, I believe, before we could actually have the system completed. The oscillator, I believe, was still in prototype phase. Potentially the Echophone as well, but I can't recall. But yeah, so the initial system, we were sort of designing toward it. So you had mentioned earlier, when you were designing some of these modules, was it with a system in mind? And early on, maths, Wogglebug, quad multimode gate, no. But there's a point where we were designing with the system in mind. And that point is after we did the Renee. It became this thing of, okay, we're pretty close to having a complete instrument. What else can we make to flush that out? And that's where things like the DPO, the Optimix, Echophone, and Phonogene all came about, because it was this idea of having a system that encompassed these classic West Coast synthesis techniques, but also these tape music and digitally controlled DSP techniques into one suitcase that you could carry with you on a plane or on a bus or a train or whatever, and take with you places. Right. So that's what's kind of interesting about it. It was a very organic process. So like I said, it was not developed as something that we would sell to the public. It was developed as a challenge to these 5 artists, and there was only ever going to be 5 records, and they were all going to have a very similar look, and they all were going to have a very similar, well, obviously the same instrumentation. The only variable was the artist. So even the person who did all the cover art, for example, for the Shared System series, the initial 5 Shared System records, Zach Smith, he did the cover art for all of them, and he maintained a consistent style for all of the records. And if you look at the original records, there's symbols on the back. There's a piano roll symbolizing the René CV out. The stepped random voltage is symbolizing the woggle bug. There's a hand symbolizing you, the artist, turning knobs, which is something that sometimes I think modular synthesists forget. There's all these knobs here. And so if you look at the covers on the Shared System series, you'll see those 5 symbols that are kind of indicating, it's an interpretation how I heard the record. So for example, Alessandro's has a lot of wires leading to the hand, because I know he played a lot of the parts on the synth by hand. Richard's record has a lot of cable work leading towards the stepped random, because I know the woggle bug was the heart of his creature patch. It's very interesting to me that this concept somehow blossomed into an instrument that many people, many electronic musicians around the world have gotten for themselves. And they too have joined the challenge, I think, in some ways. A lot of people, when they get a shared system, have this desire to create some pieces of music with it. And I think the reason for that is that there's this framework. There was those initial records, and there was this initial idea of here's an instrument. And yes, there are some limitations. There's some very deliberate limitations. For example, there is no filter, which was a very deliberate choice to have no filter. Even though at the time there were some filters in development, and we had made the quad multimode gate, there was talk of the MMG already kind of kicking around. There was a very deliberate choice to say, no, we're not going to have a filter. That was part of the challenge to the artist. Other folks have noted, well, there's no noise source, for example. And again, it's a challenge to the artist. It's not everything. This is not all the possible function blocks of a modular synthesizer. This is a small selection of them in this one case. And the challenge is to you, the artist, to make some music with it. And I think potentially that initially that challenge was exciting to people. And so we started, after we launched the series of records, we started getting emails from folks saying, hey, I've listened to the records, or I bought the records and I really enjoyed them, and I'm wondering how I could get a shared system for myself, because I would like to try to make music with this collection of modules as well. And after a while, we had enough interest that it seemed like a good idea to try to make a few of these. Now, when I say a few, again, the numbers were much smaller. So I think in our minds, we were going to call Steve at Mono Rocket. That's who made these original cases. These are made of wood, with classic Tolex covering like you would find on an old guitar amp, and then the end caps again like you would find in a guitar amp or speaker cabinet from the 70s. And so we called Steve and said, can we get, and I'm going to get this number incorrect, I'm sure if you asked Kelly she probably would be able to remember the exact number, but probably something like 20 cases or 10. I think so. The idea was, okay, we're going to make 10 or 20 of these systems. We've got some interest from customers. And these were, these were direct. We didn't sell them to dealers because there just wasn't that level of interest at the time. Everything was just a lot smaller at the time. So most of the people who were ordering shared systems at that point also were folks that we knew. And a lot of them got their systems hand delivered, for example. If we were going out to LA for a trade show, we might carry a shared system with us, and at the end of the trade show, hand it off to somebody. This is very common at that time. There's no plan for that. The initial experiment was done, and if you haven't listened to those records, I would urge you to check them out. Most of the artists that were involved have those records either on their Bandcamp pages or on their streaming pages. Well, we do have some B-stock cases or even some completely unsellable cases that we could try that out with. This is the kickflip challenge. This is the kickflip challenge. Can you kickflip a shared system? If you can kickflip a shared system, you can keep it. Right, so creating a more classic pop, rock, country western type, verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, those types of structures in music, but with modular synthesis. So my advice to somebody that wants to do that would be to use a DAW, because that's going to be the way that you can still utilize the wonderful elements of modular, the really broad sound palette and the just the level of searching and exploration that it encourages, the hands-on performance elements. If you create a pattern or a loop with a modular synthesizer, you can vary it over time, record that into your DAW, set up another pattern or loop, vary that over time, create variations of these themes, record them all, and then arrange them all. That would be my advice. I think trying to do traditional pop, rock, country western, R&B, any kind of music that has that traditional structure is going to be very hard, especially with a system as primitive as this original shared system. That's an interesting question. So I was thinking about that one, and if you were alive at that time and trying to create something like the shared system, let's say you had traveled into the future, and you had met myself or Walker, and we had showed you the shared system, and then you had to go back, and you couldn't bring one with you, and now you're hanging around San Francisco, and you're trying to figure out how you can get something together like that shared system you saw in the future. It would be actually quite hard. I think you would need to get to know Don Buchla first of all, because you would need him to make you some of his oscillators and other effects. For example, I guess you would need, I don't think this would get you all the way there, but you would need a couple of 158s from him. You might need some of the gates. You need a couple of, I think they were 192. You would need some sort of modulator. The modulators that were available at that time weren't really as snappy, and the ranges weren't as good as what we have today. I mean, my gosh, if you use the 100 series function generators, you realize that they are nowhere near what we have today. I always describe them as they have this sort of lumpy sound compared to the sharp, almost knife-like sound that we have today in function generators. There is a random voltage generator as well. It's very primitive. It actually uses relays instead of classic IC-based sample and hold. It's kind of clacks along and has a lot of droop. It's interesting, and it's there. I can't remember the number for that one either. They made touch plates. I think that's the 112, so you'd have to get some of those. The sequencer, there's just nothing like the Rene at that time. Absolutely nothing. It's just not even if you were to purchase 4 of the available sequencers would you be able to achieve something like that. And the same is true of the Tempi, although obviously the Tempi is not in the original. So then you have these digital signal processors, the voltage controlled DSP. Again, nothing like that in the 60s. Now, you could get yourself a tape echo. I think, I feel like the Echoplex would have been available by that time. I don't think the Roland Space Echo would have been available in the 60s. The other thing you could do is get a small reel-to-reel tape machine with Varispeed, or even worse, a Variac, literally starving the motor and making it slow down or speed up. So that could get you potentially some echo sounds. You'd need a mixer to use with that, of course, in order to get repeats and to blend the original signal with the repeats. For Reverb, there was a spring reverb unit in the Buchla system and the Moog system. So you could have gotten, I guess, one of those spring reverb units. I'm sure there was other ways of getting spring reverb at the time. That was probably easier to find. Now, is spring reverb anything like the Reverb? No. Is the Reverb anything like spring reverb? Absolutely not. Yeah. Could it not be more different, really? I'm just thinking that's as close as I could get. And then there's the Morphogene or the Phonogene in the original. Now, you could potentially get yourself some reel-to-reel machines and cut loops. And that's what you would have to do. You would have to get a little splicing block and some razors and some tape and some Band-Aids, since you're probably going to cut yourself while you're trying to cut the loops. And that's how you would be making your loops. Now, would that be the same as the Morphogene or Phonogene? No, absolutely not. But it would be as close as you could get at that time. And honestly, Buchla and Moog was it. That was the game back then. And you needed either to be very good friends with people who owned these things or built them, or you needed a lot of cash, tens of thousands of dollars to even get started. I mean, gosh, Modular has grown so much since the shared system was conceived of and built. It's kind of amazing that the shared system is still relevant. And it shows that this odd collection of modules, which obviously has many functional holes, this odd collection of modules, for whatever reason, is quite intriguing to musicians. And I think if we were to go and try to make a new shared system that fixed all those problems and fulfilled all those missing function blocks, it would probably not be very popular, because it wouldn't be that odd collection that forced people to do things a little differently. Maybe that time has passed. Maybe most of the folks that wanted this challenge have gotten it. And so if that is the case, we'll move on and do something completely new. I don't think we'll ever do a shared system 2, because the shared system was something that we did at a time where it seemed very important to do. And then it grew beyond our wildest dreams. And now many, many people have made shared system pieces. And then that's wonderful. But to expand on the idea, I think, would be to decimate the original concept. So I don't know why we would want to do that.